top of the hour, so I think we will get started and just honor your time. I know lots of you are joining us from your desk at work, your lunch hour, so we will go ahead and begin and let people join when they're able. I want to welcome you to the Children's Grief Center Parent Lunch and Learn series. This is how to talk with children about death and grief. We were thrilled with everyone who was able to come last time and some of the feedback that we got to help us shape this session to meet your needs. So a couple of things. I hope as you were waiting in the waiting room that you just saw some of that info. Number one, this session is being recorded, and it will not have your name or your face if you have your camera on in the recording, but it is recorded and will be accessible on our website. If you attended the September 15th and you've been looking for the recording, it's on its way. We're kind of revamping our website to make these easier to access for you. So the turnaround time will pick up speed. So if you want to share this with other people in your world or your child's world, you'll be able to find that on our website in just a few days. I've put in the chat. You can find the chat there usually at the bottom of your screen. Click on the chat. I've put a link to our website there. So if you want to save that, feel free to do so. I hope that you will settle in. Hope you've got your lunch or a cup of coffee. You're welcome to turn on your camera, but stay muted if that feels good to you. But you can also just stay in your own private space and leave your camera off as you engage this session in whatever way feels right for you. So we invite you to do that. Just a couple pieces. One is please ask your questions in the chat as you go, and I can respond as our presenters presenting today. And I can also interrupt Nadine, and if there's some of those questions that are kind of having a theme, I will ask Nadine to speak to them. So please feel free to keep the chat really active. We are hoping that COVID has changed things, and so we're really hoping that this can also feel like a place where there's a little bit of a sense of community. These are parents who are also parenting grieving children or teens, and so feel free to share both your questions and also things that have worked for your family as Nadine's sharing content. We welcome you to do that. Lastly, last time, if you were able to join us last time, we had a couple of polls just to get feedback from you, and we didn't share the results of that. And so that feedback we felt was mostly for us, but as we thought about it, again, we want this to feel like you are connecting, even in this private or online way, with other parents who are on a similar journey as you. And so today, we'll definitely be sharing the results of that. We have just a couple of polls to get your feedback, and also I guess help us all just to begin to think about these things in new ways. And so we'll share those with you, and you can get a sense of where other parents are coming from as well. I think that's it for housekeeping, short and sweet. And the last thing is it's a privilege for me to introduce our presenter today. This is Nadine Garapi-Fisk, and she began her work over 20 years ago as a counselor in the field of hospice, palliative, and bereavement care. She has been with Hospice Calgary, who's the parent organization for the Children's Grief Center. She's been with Hospice Calgary for 20 years and is the director of our Children's Grief Center. So she's incredibly knowledgeable and skillful, and I know you'll walk away with new insights and also some tools for how to support yourself and your kids after the session today. So Nadine, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll be kind of with you guys on the chat.
Thanks, Shanna. I'm glad to have so many of you join us today to have this important conversation. It feels like a bit of a one-way. It's still weird, I think, for all of us to be talking to a screen as opposed to having this back and forth. But we're getting used to it, and we're hearing there's some benefits to that as well. Maybe it gives you time to engage with some of the material and let it sit with you and see what comes up and what do you want to grab onto as well. So as Shanna said, use the chat. I'm not seeing it, but Shanna and I have been working together for a while, and she'll alert me to some pieces that we need to pay attention to. I think the topic today really is about the conversations, and I say conversations and not conversation, the conversations that we have with our children that are the most heartbreaking and the most difficult. And it can be so hard to think about how we do that. And it can be paralyzing at the thought that we're going to need to have these conversations, or that we need to go back to it. And what we're going to talk about today is give you some signposts for these conversations that are really ongoing. They're not finite. It's not a one discussion. You don't get one go at it. So how do we go about doing that, and how can we support you in doing that? Let's start here before we go anywhere else. As I just mentioned, these heartbreaking, difficult conversations can paralyze us. The idea that we need to do it right, and we've heard that from you as parents. We've heard that from teachers and other professionals who say, I'm so afraid to say the wrong thing. And I love the idea that maybe gives us a little bit of space, and that suggests that we're going to build from the least worst. And I love the least worst expression. It comes from ethics. And in ethics, we have to make choices between difficult options. It's never wrong and right, otherwise it wouldn't be an ethical dilemma. And so in this case, the least worst gives us space to say, okay, this is what I'm starting with, and I'm going to build from that. And that's part of the information that we're sharing today. That's part of the food for thought for you. How are you going to build from that really heartbreaking information you need to share? How are you going to build from that to make it something that you feel you can be behind, you feel that you can engage with? We're also, I also use the expression that clear is kind. And using the words dead and died and grief they're clear. And using any other words and trying to sugarcoat that by using other words or leading to maybe different expressions are actually going to be super confusing. And confusion also creates distance. So when we're confused and we don't understand, we kind of step back and we feel disconnected from the person sharing the information. So we can minimize that by using the words, and they usually have more negative connotation for us than they do for children as well. And so we'll be able to join in by using those words and be clear with each other. Communication, we often think of words and what we say, but communication is a whole lot of listening as well in that. And sometimes we forget. I know I forget a lot when it comes to my children too. And so when we listen, we get some clues. We hear the questions, and that will allow us, and the tone and where they're at, and that will allow us to decide where we're going to go with this conversation, how much information we're going to give, how we're going to give it, and it's going to be important for us to limit the information, because that's also kind. We're going to go with a little bit of information, and then we're going to build from there. You see, there's a theme here. We're starting from this, and then we're building around. And the gift of the I don't know. It often feels inadequate to say I don't know. I think we're shaped to know and to give an answer to things. And there's a gift in the I don't know. When our children ask us questions and we're not sure of the answer, we're not sure how we should answer, the I don't know gives us space and time. It allows us to step back and really think through, what is it that I want to share? How should I share this information? It's also a gift for them. Us saying I don't know is giving them permission to say I don't know. And it can be scary sometimes for a child to hear the parent say I don't know, but there's a way that we can do that by qualifying it. You know, I don't really know how to answer that. Is it okay if I think about it and get back to you? I have never heard of a child saying, no, actually, I need you to answer me right now. I have never heard of that. And so let's use that gift of space and time. Okay, so now that we're there, let's move on to what I want to give you in this world where we're bombarded by information, where we have a limited capacity to engage with new information or how to retain information. I'd like you to hold on to 3 C's: communication, connection, and comfort. And I've used the bridge, the image of a bridge. These are new illustrations that we've had done for us, for the Children's Grief Centre. So I'm really excited to start sharing them. But I'm using that because this is how we bridge the gap between us and our children that sometimes comes when there's a lot of big things, difficult things happening in our lives. There can be this gap that gets created. And so that communication, that connection and comfort is going to link us to one another as well. So back to the communication and what I was saying earlier about the listening. Often when we equate communication with talking, with words, with what we say. And that's very true. We need to pay attention to the words. And I said that earlier in terms of the grief, the dead, and using those words. Those are important, absolutely. But we're also needing to pay attention to the nonverbal. What messages are we delivering without sometimes being aware of it, just by the way that we behave, even the way that we may slow down how we talk. That's something I'm paying attention to. I'm a fast talker. And so I realize that my tone changes. In fact, my husband says I have my counselor voice and I have my, mom or at home voice. And they are different because the context is different. And so even the tone of voice, the way that we lean in, or we tilt our head, or we say something but our face says something else. We need to pay attention to that. That says a lot that in our communication. The listening, as I said, so important. It gives us clues as to where the other person is at, and that allows us to respond and adapt, which means that then maybe the communication, the words that we had prepared that are a bit more static, we're actually going to be able to be fluid and flexible with that, because we're listening. We're also listening with our eyes. We're going to pay attention to their nonverbal. What are they telling us? Are they moving away from us? Are they leaning in? Are they reaching out for our hand as we're talking? All of these are going to give us some clues as to how we're wanting to communicate and what that's going to look like. I'm a big fan of trees, and this image I thought was just so perfect because when we're looking at what we're going to share and how we're going to share, we're actually coming to a place of saying, okay, how are we going to make those decisions? And before I go any further, let me just say here that the intention with this Lunch and Learn wasn't to give you the words to say if your child is this age or this to do, but rather that we have handouts that give you that more precise information, and you can look at those. Absolutely, take a look, and I think Shanna's put the link, and she'll put the link again, maybe Shanna, for our website under resources. So take a look at that. But I don't know for you, but for me, in terms of making decisions in the specifics, I need to gain an understanding of the why. Why would I say that? And what does it relate to? And how do I get to those decisions? And so this is what today's Lunch and Learn is about, is helping you with the, I think of the funnel, why and how, and then what are the specifics. And so when you're thinking about how am I going to decide what I say and what I share and how I do that, some of the things you're going to think about are how old is my child? What capacity do they have? What conversations do we have? there's no two 7-year-olds that are the same. Some of them are not talking a lot and may need more simple terms to understand or even express themselves. And then we've got these 7-year-olds who are talking like they're 13, and the way that they think and they interact with the world is very different. So we're going to need to pay attention to that to know what we're going to how we're going to share information, how that conversation is going to go. We're also going to want to pay attention to what do they know already? What kind of conversations have we had? What have they shared? And also what questions are they asking of us? That will also give us those clues as to where do we want to go? What information do we want to share? Shanna, do you want to do the first poll at this point before we get into the how? I think that'll be helpful, just to get a sense of where you're at and some of the factors that you're going to consider. So in terms of ages of your children or children in your care. And of course, multiple choice, you have more than one child, you can indicate that. Here, we're going to give you a little bit longer. Beauty. Okay, Shanna, do you want to share? Because I think it's helpful, again, that which Shanna shared earlier in terms of a lot of sharing, of not sharing with you the polls last time. It's important you're gaining information, that's great. Our intention is also for you to feel part of a community. You're not on your own. How many other parents? So I'm on this call and I have a child between the ages of 6 and 9. Oh, I'm not alone. There's 10 others who have children between the ages of 6 and 9. And I think that's helpful when we don't feel so alone and isolated, to feel like we're able to move forward. So thanks, Shanna, for sharing that. So the next piece that I wanted to pay attention to is the how. So we're looking at the words, we're looking at how much information am I going to share, but how are we going to share that? So if, if we're adults, or if we're at work, you might have somebody say to you, would you step into my office for a minute and we'll have a conversation? When it comes to children, those are not the conversations that we have. And I don't know how many of you have had conversations with your children where you say, can you please sit here and talk? We're going to have this important conversations. Maybe you do. And that's great if it works for you. But there's also many different ways that we can have conversation. And so what does that look like for you? And especially when they're big or heartbreaking conversations, sometimes it's helpful to not have eye contact or be moving or doing something else. That's kind of, we're in a conversation, but we're also distracted at the same time. It's not just about the conversation. I'm sure you have children who said, oh my goodness, do we have to talk all the time? But when we're talking while we're doing something else, maybe it doesn't feel like we're so focused on the conversation while we're still paying attention to it. So let's explore that. Shanna, can you share that poll? Asking you to share with us in what setting have you found yourself having important or difficult conversations with your child or your children? And you can take as many as you've used. That's great. All sorts of varied ways that you're having these conversations, which is fantastic. We'll just wait a tiny bit longer to give everybody some time to share. Yeah. So yeah, the movement, the playing, and already having a setting where they're comfortable, maybe where we're connected, and we'll we'll talk about that in a minute, but that connection, the not having eye contact can be really helpful too in having these conversations. We're less exposed and maybe able to be a bit more vulnerable. Sharing a meal around the table, sometimes that doesn't happen. We're busy, but when we do share, break bread together, and we feel connected to one another. Thanks, Shanna. One thing about bedtime, I know many of us have conversations, and often they're also initiated by children. I would say at bedtime. That's a time where sometimes they want to push back their bedtime, or we explain it to children, saying it's that time of day where all of a sudden, first time in the day where you're going to be on your own in the dark, and all your thoughts and fears and different things that were coming into your brain all day that you didn't have time for or couldn't make space for, they now all come together. And so we normalize that for them. Of course, this is happening. And that may be when they engage you or try to engage you in these conversations. And of course, we want to respond to that. The risk with that is that then they go to bed with, perhaps they have limited capacity to engage with the conversation. And also they go to bed with those thoughts and more questions and more thoughts. And sometimes it's reassuring, and sometimes we've opened more doors. And so my recommendation would be that when they are wanting to engage in conversation at bedtime, that we focus on the reassurance, that we focus on the connection, on the comforting, that maybe we say, should we put some of these thoughts away? Sometimes we use a mason jar or another box where we put some of these questions or thoughts away, and we put them in the box to show them. We'll come back to this. I don't think right now may not be the time, because we want to pay really good attention to this, and we want to honor your questions. These are great questions. Let's put them aside and let's come back to them another time. And then we can set a space that is really the right space and right time for that. So again, I would just reiterate Shanna's invitation to share in the chat as well. I'm not seeing that and seeing if you're doing that, but I invite you to share some of your thoughts on that and what you've done and found successful. So as we're talking about children initiating conversations at night, let's talk also about selective hearing, because that is a reality. It's a reality for us, and it's a reality for our children. And often we interpret that as a negative thing. Oh, they just listen to what they want, or thinking that because they didn't respond to something that we said, meaning that they didn't take it in. And that is not necessarily true. They heard it, they choosing to respond or not. But also saying, well, I share the information, so, well, because I shared it, he heard it. And so he knows all about these things. I think we need to pay attention to what purpose does it serve. So is it intentional or not? Is it that they're actually busy, or they've got lots of other things on their mind? How many of us have been part of a conversation and not too long after, not remembering what was said, or even someone's name, being introduced to someone and they say their name, and 2 minutes later you think, goodness, what was her name? Because we weren't paying attention. Was it intentional? No. Were we super nervous of introducing ourselves? Maybe, and we were paying attention to saying our name right. And so there are different ways where selective hearing is intentional or non-intentional. Sometimes we just need to protect ourselves and we're not able to engage with the conversation, and we may just nod along or partly pay attention. So just, I think for us as the adults, as the parents, paying attention to what purpose does it serve, and also how do we best respond. So selective hearing, when we're having these conversations, these difficult conversations, are slightly different from the asking your children to pick up their socks while they're playing video games and they're not doing it. Sometimes they don't hear you. Sure. Most of the times because it's a lot more fun doing what they're doing than going to pick up their socks. But in this case, there's an emotional toll. There's a potential that what you're saying is just flooding them and they're not able to take it in. So I think paying attention to that is helpful. So the second C is connection. And that having connection allows us to have better communication in terms of the what we share, the how we share. I'm sure that you have found that when you feel connected to another person, you're perhaps better able to read their nonverbals as well. Sometimes we read things into the words that are being used or the way that someone behaves. But if we feel connected to them and we have a sense of what's going on for them, like the context, our judgment might be different. We might interpret things differently. And so that connection becomes so important in communication. It's the paying attention. It's that genuine presence, which we know is difficult. There's so many demands and it's coming at us all sorts of ways. But having that connection, that attention, developing trust means that when I say something or what I share with you, when I say I don't know, you're trusting that I don't know. And you're trusting that if I say I'm going to come back to you, that I will. Or if I invite you to share something with me and say, I can handle it, that you trust that I am going to be able to handle it. Communication on its own without the connection is difficult to gain that trust and that real presence. And that open door policy is huge when we talk about conversations with an S, that it's not a finite conversation, that we're giving the building, we're giving a little bit of information, we're paying attention to the questions they're asking, their responses, the nonverbal, and then we're going to say, we're going to add on maybe in the moment, or we're going to think maybe they need more information. I'm going to need some time to think about that. But what we're going to say is, I'm sharing this with you and saying, I don't know what that looks like for us. I'm not, we're in this together. I'm also confused about what's going on. I also feel sad. Do you find that sometimes you're like at your desk at school and 1 minute you're focusing and you're right on top of your math test, and the next minute you're in a completely different place? Because it happens to me at work. Doing that is opening door. It's saying, I'm sharing a little bit with you. You can share with me. It's also saying, I'm not quite sure. This is how much information I'm giving you right now. I don't know if that's what you're needing, or you're needing something else. So I don't know that I explained that really clearly. But you can come to me anytime and ask me more information, or say, you know, that conversation we had, there's bits that I didn't understand. And we get to do that again. That's the open door policy. That's the ongoing conversations. It's a gift. It's also heartbreaking. It can be, we may avoid those because our hearts break every time, but also we're afraid of breaking our children's hearts. And so we may want to do this one conversation and then assume certain things will what happened. But their hearts are breaking anyway, is what I would say. Your heart is breaking anyway. You may as well connect in that and be able to be present for each other in that way as well. I saw this cartoon and I just loved it. Back to my point about nonverbals and what it gives to us. And when we feel connected to one another, we can read signs. And so, you know, this dog sharing with this other dog, I know the signs for a dog, and when it wags its tail, it means they're ready to play and they're excited. Oh, didn't know that was the case for the cat. So back to when we know and we have context and we have understanding, we're able to better communicate together, and it goes better too. So body language is one of those signals that we rely on. And I think I wanted to bring up our awareness to the times that we may not be congruent, where what we say and what we do don't match. And back to being clear and being kind and not being confused. it can be so confusing for children. So let me give you a personal example. Some time ago, at the table with my children, and one of my sons asked if I was okay, and you could see I clearly wasn't. And he asked if I was okay, and I responded, "I'm fine, thanks for asking." And I'm fine still, with the face that looked like not fine, but you know, the word said I'm fine. And there was a time lapse, and later on I went back to him and I said, "Hey, do you remember when you asked me if I was fine? And I said to you that I was fine. I wasn't, and you knew that. You could see that, and you asked me, and that must have been really confusing, because you could see I wasn't fine, but my word said I was fine. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that I confused you." And it's important I tell you that, because you need to trust what you perceived. You need to trust your gut that told you I wasn't okay. What I wish I would have said was, actually, I'm not feeling fine. I'm not feeling great. But I'm going to be okay in this moment. Or, you know, I don't really feel like talking about it, but thank you so much for asking. Being congruent is helpful for our kids, so that, again, that trust piece, that connection piece, the relying on their instincts, and also giving them permission, so that when someone says to them, "Hey, how are you doing?" they can say, "I'm not great, actually." There's a lot of things that we do that are modeling and giving permission for our children. And I'm curious about how that's maybe showed up for you. Times that you haven't been congruent. And I wondered whether we could have a little awareness rising moment here. Thanks, Jana, for sharing this poll. And please pick as many examples. And we're all human, and parents who are doing their very best. And the very best doesn't show up 100% of the time. But we get to go back, and we get to we get to do better. And so, and being aware is such a big part of it. So I find myself incongruent when I tell my child I'm fine, and it's clear that I'm not. I'm asking them, "How are you?" But I'm not necessarily paying super attention to that, because I'm multitasking. I'll tell them that grief can bring all sorts of emotions, but then when those emotions show up, I may not be able to meet them where they're at. And then expecting my child to share with others or me about how they are, but I find myself that actually I'm having a hard time sharing with others. Hey. Yeah, it's a bit more vulnerable, this one, this poll, right? Looking in and saying, yeah, I have done that. And I think for most of us, parents, human beings, I think we have been there and can tick those too. Thank you for engaging with us in this community of parents and adults in children's worlds trying to do the very best at difficult times. Okay, let's move on to our next piece, which is comfort. And so providing comfort, and I mentioned that before when talking about bedtime conversations. Comfort is such a big part of how we connect and how we do conversations. We create some comfort so that we can have those conversations, and then comfort so that we can kind of come down from these difficult conversations as well. So there's a lot, I'm sure it's out there about regulation, but co-regulation. So it's hard. I saw something again this morning on Instagram talking about your children will never be able to really hear what you're saying or taking in if you're so anxious as you're sharing it, or so dysregulated. And so the reality is that when we're dealing with big, difficult, tricky emotions, it's hard for us to present that way, and it's okay to show emotions. Co-regulation doesn't mean not showing emotions, so we need to be clear about that. It's okay for us to be sad or to be angry. It's how we're handling that. You know, it's the range of that, and so to be able to be breathing together, to be able to have the capacity to support each other, and it takes us to take the lead on that. And knowing when and how to provide comfort too is important. So, you know, we may have a child who benefits a lot from hugging, and we may have a child who does not want that. And let's read, and also that can change anytime. You know, any of us with teenagers know that too. You know, 1 minute they're like their little young self, and they're needing to come into the circle and have those hugs and comfort, and the next minute they're needing a lot of space. And so back to the listening and responding, paying attention to that. How do we provide comfort? What does it look like? What are the different options? Hugs obviously are not the only thing. Maybe just, again, making a cup of hot chocolate and putting it on the desk of our teen is saying, I'm thinking about you, I'm right here for you. But it doesn't need words. I have this piece too that I've used for years when working with families, making a contract between teens and parents to say, you know, hugs don't need reasons, because as parents, our inclination, if, you know, someone hasn't come in for a hug or a conversation for a long time, and they do, what's going on? Is there something the matter? Did somebody upset you? Do you want to share? That may just be enough to get them to go and not come back for a hug. So they're coming for a hug. They have their reasons. All we need to do is respond to that. If they want to talk, they will. And we can just say that, hey, if you want to talk, you know, I'm here. And soothing is important too. How do we do that for ourselves? How do we show our children that we do that for ourselves? What are the different ways that we can do that and teach them about that? And small ways too, right? In responding to the context. So what you do when you're at school or out with a group of friends might be different from what you do when you're at home and with people that it's okay to be vulnerable with, that get what's going on for you. So giving them some tips, you know, I do this in this context, and in this other context, I might use other ways of soothing as well. And I love this quote from Maya Angelou and about remembering how people make you feel more than remembering the words that they uttered. I think that's helpful. And before we move on to maybe, hopefully there's some things in the chat and some sharing, or maybe if something's coming to mind, you can share it there, and some questions. Ultimately, when we think of our 3 C's, and when we think about how to talk with children about death and grief, that fluidity and flexibility is going to be our companion. Being able to be responsive in our communication is the best thing that we can do. We can have the best laid plans. And in fact, that's great. That's what allows us to be responsive, is to have had thought and maybe have another adult or other people, whether they're friends that we trust or family members or a children's grief center counselor, or to be able to figure out the what and the how, really thinking that through, and then having that plan and feeling like we've got some sense of what's going to happen will create space then for us to be responsive, to be able to pay attention to their nonverbals, to their words, be able to come back. And again, the continuous aspect of these conversations will be important. That's it. I feel like I've run a little bit through that, but I wanted to make sure that we had time, Shanna, for conversation, for questions.